Hey everyone, it is Chrissy at Pinovate. This tutorial is for our round weaving kit. It is so cute. You get to do the start to finish and they turn out great every time. So grab your kit and we'll go through all of the supplies together. Okay, so let's go through all of your supplies together. In your kit, you're going to get an 8-inch brass ring, as well as a little chunk of macrame cord. This is to wrap the outside, as well as a little bundle of cotton string to warp the inside of it. And on top of that, you're going to get a whole bunch of different yarn and fabric of different thicknesses and textures to work into your weaving. So it's going to create a really, really cool look to it. So grab all your supplies and we'll get started. Okay, so the first step we need to do is we're actually going to wrap our entire brass ring with macrame cord. So that's going to give it kind of a finished edge, as well as allowing us to warp it with string on the inside to help create our weaving. So this is our first step. What we're going to do is find the end of our string or our cord. There we go. And I'm going to tie it on anywhere on there in a knot. So I just want to make sure that it is secure. I'm just going to do a single knot because I'm going to undo that later. Okay, so now for wrapping the outside, you can see that the cord, it has a natural, it's twisted and it kind of has a natural direction that it's going to wrap. So for some of you it might be over, and then for some of you it might actually be under, okay? Just depending on which direction you started with. So we want to wrap it so that it's not coming undone or fraying on us. We want to kind of keep that tight. So for mine, I believe it is this direction. I'm kind of working with the direction of the wrap in the cord itself. So all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna wrap the entire thing. I want it to be relatively close together so it sits nice and tight. Not too loose, not any spaces in between. I want it to be touching each other, and I'm gonna wrap the entire thing all the way around. Okay, so I just finished wrapping my ring and I've made it all the way around. This cord here is nice and tight, it's not moving, which is exactly what we want. But on the other side, it is starting to loosen up a little bit as I was going. So I'm just gonna spin this and tighten up all of that cord before I tie this off. We want it to be tight because that's gonna help with our warping, and it's gonna help with our weaving to be nice and secure. Okay. All right, so now I have all of my cord on this side, nice and tight. I've just twisted it up and I'm ready to attach these. So I'm actually going to undo this first knot that I tied to attach it to the ring. I'm gonna undo that. I'm gonna fill in this last little bit. All right, so now once they are touching, I'm gonna tie this in a double knot together. So two ends tied together, nice and tight. Excellent. Okay, so I have wrapped my ring. It's nice and tight. I have a double knot, and I actually put my double knot onto one side. So this will end up being the back of my weaving, and then there's the front. So once that is done, you can either, completely up to you, you can leave a little bit of a tail and you can actually work that into the weaving itself. Or if you're confident that it's not gonna come undone, you can just trim that right off. All right, so I have left a little bit of a tail on my wrap here. I'm gonna work that into my weaving. Should you choose to trim that off, I would do a little dab of glue right on the knot just to make sure that it doesn't come undone, okay? But we are ready to do our warping. So the warping is actually the string that's going around in the middle that we're going to weave upon. Okay, so you will have a little bundle of cotton string. It doesn't matter what color because it's getting covered up. So we're gonna find one end of our string and we're going to tie it. I'm gonna move it over, so I don't wanna start on the same knot. I'm gonna tie it kind of over this direction. And I'm just going to tie it in between two of the wraps on there. I'm gonna slide that right in between and tie that on. I like to leave a bit of a tail as well. Tails are always good. We can trim them later if needed. Okay, so I have this tied on, and we're just gonna be creating a pattern with our string. So it's almost like a mandala, or you could think of it almost like a spirograph, you know, when you would draw in the spirograph and it would start creating all these lines coming out to the side. So same sort of idea, okay? So with my bundle of string, I'm actually going to go, I want to go straight across, so as straight as possible. And we're always gonna go into the center first, okay? So if this was floating, I'm gonna go into the center of my hoop and then bring it around on the bottom, okay? So this is going from the bottom underneath, and I want this to be as straight as possible. If you wanted to be very particular, you could measure each side just to make sure, but I feel like that's relatively close. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fill it in. Again, I'm pushing this through that wrap string on the bottom so it sits almost on the inside of it, okay? So I'm going from the bottom to the top, into the middle, and again, I'm gonna go from the bottom and wrap around to the top. So this time, we're gonna go on an angle. I'm gonna do roughly 7, so 7 or 8 little wraps. So if I count here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I'm gonna go roughly 7 here. And again, same thing, I'm gonna go in between those 2 wraps and then back into the middle, from the bottom, and I'm gonna go 7 again. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, from the bottom to the top, and we're just gonna keep doing that same pattern. Okay, so into the middle, underneath, 7 over, okay, in between those 2 wraps, into the middle, underneath, 7 over. Okay, we want them to be spaced relatively the same distance apart. Okay, so I'm over, so into the middle, and then 7 over again. Okay, and you're gonna continue this pattern all the way around. All right, so I am on my last little bit of warping here. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. We kind of want this to be as close to the center as possible. As long as everything is roughly spaced relatively equally, we'll be okay. Another thing to note is if your wrap on the outside is loose, this is all gonna start to shift. So your wrap on the outside should be nice and tight. As you're pulling in your warp and this starts moving, it might kind of complicate things. We wanna make sure that that is nice and tight. As well as if your wraps, if you have like a funny number, you might have to do 7 on some, 8 on some, that's totally fine. As long as they're relatively close to about the same sizing apart, that is absolutely not a problem. All right, so I have my last, I'm doing my last warp here, and this is where we're gonna start pulling everything together on the inside. We want this to be nice and tight. Okay, so I'm at the very last part of warping here. You can see, so I have one, this is my last one that I am doing. And then I have my center that I want to kind of unite in the middle. And then this is my last, that's where I started. So I want to get back to that point, okay? So down here, so what I'm gonna do is I'm going to go down into the opposite side here. So again, from front to the back and then into the middle, but I'm gonna go into the middle down here. So kind of opposite of where my string is at the bottom, I'm gonna go into there. And then this is going to start pulling everything together into the center. But now I want to wrap it around. So my last single string, I'm gonna go to the right of that last single string. Okay, now everything's kind of pulling nice and tight. And I'm just gonna wrap once around and come back up to where I started. So once around on the outside, just grab an opposite little slice of pie, go underneath, and now you should be coming up where you started at the beginning here. And you can tie those two off. And the center, as long again as if it's relatively close to the center, we're good. Everything is pulled nice together. That looks great. It's relatively spaced equally. And again, we have this, so there is a bit of movement to the string. If it's too tight, it's gonna be tricky for our weaving. But if it's too loose, it's gonna be tricky to tie as well. So this is what we're going for in the end. And I'm just gonna tie that off at the top. And I'm going to give that a trim and leave some tails to work into the weaving as well. There we go. And you have a wrapped and a warped round weaving ring. All right, so here comes the fun part. We get to kind of create whatever we want. What's so cool is it doesn't matter. You don't have to have a pattern for this. You can go any direction. This one is a little bit more horizontal. It kind of curves with the shape of it as well. Or if you wanted, you could actually do a spiral and go around and around and around. There is nothing stopping you. You can do whatever kind of design you would like. Another really cool thing, again, is with all of the supplies that you have, there is so much different texture going on here. You have big soft bubbles, you have a little bit of fabric in here, you have these little loopies down here. So it's very, very cool, it's very forgiving. You can create it however you desire. All right, so this is one that I've already begun. I have some big tufts in the bottom. I have some smaller yarn, it kind of looks almost like the ocean, which is kind of cool. Some fluffy one here, and then this feels almost like a soft teddy bear, which is nice. So all the texture is really, really cool. As for weaving, I will show you on this open side at the bottom. All right, so I'm gonna work with a little bit thicker yarn here so that you can actually see where everything is going. So as for weaving, very simple. It's up and down and up and down and up and down, okay? And we want to make sure that it is not too loose, that you're seeing all of those warp strings underneath. We want to make sure that we're always pushing it down and together to cover up any of those areas at all. So what we're gonna do is, I'll start with a little tail at the back. I always like to leave a tail. Again, we can weave this in afterwards, or we can cut it, tie it off, whatever. So this is gonna be my back. I'm not too worried about that. And all I'm going to do is be going up and down and up and down. So if this is up, the next one is down. And to create that texture, rather than pulling it tight, which is gonna create one type of look, I like to leave a bubble. So I'm gonna leave it a little bit fluffy here. Okay, so if you wanna put a finger underneath, that kind of helps keep that, that shape. And I'll go up to the next one here. All right, and then again, I'm gonna make a bubble with my thumb underneath. And I'm not pulling too tight because I do want that texture or that shape of the yarn to stay with it. Up the next one. keeping it a little bit bubbly. And I think I'm actually gonna push this, I want this into the middle, so I'm actually just gonna push this all the way down so we can see it. It's gonna tighten up in there. So I want everything to be nice and tight. All right, so these ones I'm leaving a little bit bulkier so they stand off a bit more. Give it a bit more texture. And again, I'm just pushing everything down. If you're starting along the bottom, you will be pushing it towards the outside instead. Okay, but again, you wanna make sure that everything is nice and tight. You can use a comb, your fingers, a fork, anything to just kind of keep that, all of those weaves nice and tight together. Okay, again, you can do any shape. You can do a little chunk on one side. You can do lines, a swirl, whatever pattern you desire. Okay, so for this part, I'm actually gonna work it into where the blue is as well. So I have to share that string. So I'm just gonna find a little divot in here where I can sneak in and put my yarn right in there. So then they are working together, or they're kind of seamless, or I'm not having a great big gap in between anywhere. Perfect. I'm just gonna do that a few more times to create some dimension. I'm gonna work back the opposite way. So if I'm going one direction and I'm happy and I stop where I wanna go, I'm gonna go back the other direction. So remember, if I am underneath, under one here, I'm gonna go over top the next time. Just pushing all of that down. It's going to create some really cool bubbles there. All right, and then I'm just going to work it back into my blue on this side. And again, instead of leaving a gap, I want to work it into that same warp string so that they do blend together. So I'm just going to find a little spot where they'll fit right there, and I'm just going to work that right in. Okay, I think I like how that is looking, and I'm done with this nice thick wool. So I'm going to tie this portion off now. So to do that, I'm just going to flip it over. Find my two tails here and then tie them together. So when you're tying, be careful that you're not pulling too tight, as it's actually going to affect the tension on the front as well. So when I'm tying, I'm actually tying it quite gently and not pulling with too much force to affect how it sits on the front. I just want to make sure that this is not coming undone. Okay, so that's knotted off. I'm just going to double check my front. Yeah, I like that. That looks great. And then if I'm done with this yarn, I can trim it, or again, like I have showing here. If you're going to use this maybe up a little bit further, you can leave a tail. If you're done, you can trim it, or again, like I said before, you can actually work this in with a darning needle and weave it into the back. So those are your options for the back. So that's where we're looking so far, looking good. So what's really nice is you can use anything for your weaving. So yarn is obviously kind of what comes to mind first, but you could use ribbon, you can use fabric, you can use anything that comes to mind. So I have a piece of fabric here that I'm gonna work in because I like the contrast between the light and the dark, and also the fluffy and kind of the more thin. When you're working with thinner fabrics or yarn, they will take up a very, very small space. So it does take a little bit more weaving to achieve that, just like in here. I really like the big fluffy ones because they're bulky and they cover a lot, and they're pretty substantial. So just keep in mind when you're working with thinner pieces that it will take more fabric to go in a smaller area. Okay, so I'm gonna put mine maybe just kind of over in this one spot, I think. Again, you can just create this however you like. This does not have to be any sort of pattern or any kind of image. This is kind of just a really cool, kind of abstract as well. So I'm gonna tie or just put my tail in. I'll leave it in the bottom here. And again, I'm just gonna go up and down, all the way across where I'm happy. And then again, once I go to the right, I'm gonna come back to the left, right, left, going in the up and down motion, almost like you're creating layers of bricks. So if I'm going over one warp, I'm gonna be going under it on the way back. Okay, so you can see that this is much thinner. I'm gonna have to add a lot more layers for this to be able to be seen or be a little bit more substantial. But again, I'm working my way back and I'm here over at the blue. Again, I want to do the same as I did the last time. I'm gonna find a little crevice in there between two pieces and just put my fabric straight into there. So again, we're sharing the same warp string on there, okay? Okay, so I think I like that little section there. It has like a really cool look to it, especially against the dark here. But there's something else you can do. So my tail back here, I think I'm gonna bring it to the front and actually just tie a cute little knot in the front. Maybe you tie it in a bow, whatever you like. There's no right or wrong with this. This is all however you foresee it. So I think I'm just gonna tie this and then let this hang off to the side. Okay, so again, I'm not gonna tie too tight. I just want to tie it enough that it's not going to undo. I don't want to affect how the rest of my weaving is looking. So I'm just being very careful when I'm tying that, making sure it doesn't come undone. And then I'm gonna trim that. So it's like I have a little bow on the front as well. Okay, again, that's just an option. If you don't like it, just tuck it right in the back. Or if your ribbon is longer, you could actually just tie a little bow on there, whatever you like. Okay, so I just have a little bit left up here. I could do lots of little strings. I could do a whole bunch of this, actually. This is what I'm going for. So this is roving wool. So this is kind of before it is spun into yarn. So it's very loose and you can pull it apart. It is so soft and this looks fantastic in weavings. It adds a lot of like puffy little cloud-like areas. So I'm just gonna finish off my weaving using this because this is kind of significant and like nice and bulky. So again, I'm just leaving a tail on the back and working with my roving. Another thing you can do, so I have only been doing over one, under one, over one, under one, but you could potentially go over two, under two, over two, under two. It's just gonna have a different look, but just make sure if you're going under two, that you have something to cover over it because that is a big gap underneath. So potentially I could go over two here. Let's just see how that looks. Ooh, nice and fluffy. And then I will go under two. Or actually, you know what? Under one. We're gonna go under one. looks like big fluffy clouds. So I'm gonna go over 2. And then under 1. Again, I'm leaving these nice and fluffy just to have that depth. You can, again, if you wanted, you could pull it tight. It's just going to have a different look to it. All right, so I've added my roving. I love it. It's super fluffy. You don't need very much of this because it takes up so much space. You'll only need to do a small amount of the roving. Again, once I'm done, I'm just going to tie this off in the back and give it a trim. All right, so I have a little bit of this thicker blue left, so I'm going to incorporate that on this side as well, just to add that color back in over there so it's not too much white. Okay, so I didn't like how going all the way back and forth looked, so I'm just going to contain it to this one section, and that's okay. You can absolutely change how it looks and maneuver it a little bit better to what you like. All right, so for my last little section right here, I've had this funny little tail hanging out with me all day. I'm just gonna incorporate this back in here. So rather than trimming it off before, I'm just working with it now. I just let it hang and then I can keep going with it. All right, so that last little space is filled in. I'm just gonna tie it off on the back. Actually, this is a good one to weave in. So I'm just gonna take this and wrap it around a few of the warp strings. Actually find a little spot where I can actually tie it. There's one. Two. All right, so I am done my weaving and I love it. It's great. It's very kind of abstract. I just pieced all the pieces together. I'm just gonna make sure everything is nice and tight so we're not seeing any warp strings or the yarn isn't pulling in a funny way. I just want to make sure that it is nice and I can see all of the different textures in there. And then it's done. Thank you so much for following along our tutorial for our round weaving kit. They are so much fun. I think they turn out awesome. It gives you total creative freedom, and I find it very relaxing as well. So I hope you enjoyed it, and please, we would absolutely love to see how yours turned out. So we are on Instagram, so please tag us in your photos at Pinovate and DIY Delivery. We're also on YouTube and Pinterest and Facebook and Twitter. We're on all the platforms. So give us a like, give us a follow, and we'll see you later. Thanks again.